Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
As Tommy said, we share battles of life, and with Tommy and Jimmy's here too, I think, somewhere. Jimmy, are you in the room? There you are, pal. So good to see you guys again. Three of us worked together on a thing called the Global Congress on World Evangelization in the year 2010. And actually, the Lee brothers, if you will, came along at a time when we were in deep waters. All of us ministers who have great dreams but don't know how to raise money, we were all together. And these guys came along, and their optimism and their hope was absolutely strategic for holding one of the most important gatherings of Christian leaders of the 21st century, early 21st century. So it's great to see them again. And I forgot until a couple of days ago that Tommy had his own bout with cancer. I have as well. Am I wearing everything you want me to wear? Okay. I have as well. I have a kind of liver cancer that is supposed to be a very, very tough one. Just learned about it 2 months ago. So we're in war. And my wife wears her Wonder Woman socks, and I wear my Superman socks. And we just believe that Jesus is going to guide us through this thing. And so that's what's going on. All right. That's not why I'm here. First of all, thanks to the guys, again, Tommy, your team. This is a brand new book coming out on Billy Graham. I was asked to start writing it in September because he was going to turn 100 in October. Actually, November. And so I had lots of time to write it. And then Mr. Graham started getting really ill. So we've rushed it through. You guys, I don't even know how you got these. It says advanced uncorrected proof. You have a more advanced, you have a more advanced copy than I have. And you are the first people in America to get this. And so I'm thankful to the publisher too. I think you'll enjoy it. It's kind of a Reader's Digest version of the story of Billy Graham. So if you don't have time to read some of the magnificent, huge biographies by historians, this can kind of guide you through. But most importantly, I was asked to write this, not because I'm a scholar historian. I was asked to write this because I'm an evangelist. And they wanted an evangelist to write the Billy Graham story so that at every point we could bridge toward Jesus Christ. So if this is helpful to you, think of it this way. Buy some for people that don't know Jesus yet, and especially if they have some interest in Billy Graham. Because the only reason I said yes to doing it, he hated biographies about himself. Absolutely deplored it. He always said, I don't know why anyone wants to hear about my life. But he was always saying, I just want them to hear about Jesus. So we actually wrote this to be an evangelistic piece that your friends and neighbors and co-workers might be interested in. Hear about Billy Graham, but I seek the best I know how to bridge in every chapter to the true light, which is Jesus Christ our Lord. Okay? So there you go. First off the press. Yeah, it's great. You have a copy that's more advanced than the one that I brought. All right. Now, what you may or may not know about Billy Graham, and what I'll camp on in the 18 or 19 minutes that I have left, is most people are unaware of the level of leadership gift that was poured into him. Quite an extraordinary leader. He ended up being a part of a movement that, as we would trace the history of the church, we would argue is one of the great movements of Christendom, which is called the evangelical movement. He was the titular head of that. And yet here he was, a farm boy, born in North Carolina, and every day he'd get up at 2:30 and milk his 25 cows. His grandparents had been in the Confederacy. He was a Southern boy, grew up in a churched home, but really didn't enjoy Jesus very much at all. Normal guy, normal life, and that's why in the book we put the word an ordinary man with an extraordinary God. One of the extraordinary empowerments that God tended to give him was this capacity of entrepreneurship, the number of organizations that he started, but more than that, he had the capacity to have people really like him. And so wherever he went, he started meeting Christian people from around the world, and before you knew it, this thing called evangelicalism was starting to grow as, and today, a leading tipping edge of the church, of the kind of churches that we go to, which we would call evangelical. He didn't plan for it. It kind of fell upon him. And in a unique way, as only the Holy Spirit, the living God, can do, God pours out what is necessary for his people. So this hesitant, entrepreneurial powerhouse of a human being starts gathering not only millions and millions of people to Christ, but starts galvanizing the Christian church toward Jesus Christ. 2 weeks ago, we had his memorial. Not quite 2 weeks ago now. And if you could have been there, you would have had the same opinion. Nobody could gather this disparate group of Christians from around the world like Billy Graham. Well, what was it? What was it in it? I don't know. A lot of it was just God, just flat out God. But I do have for you, I hope, 4 traits of leadership in Billy that I watched over the years of being with him that may be of some value to you as you think of your role as marketplace leaders, marketplace involvement people. Well, I guess what I'm saying is, don't think of him only as, quote, America's pastor. Think of him as evangelical head of the world, a position for which he was never elected but fell into. What are some of the things that made Billy Graham unique? I'm going to give you 4. I don't have PowerPoint. Hopefully I'm compelling enough of a speaker that you'll remember. Okay? So here's number one. Number 1. Humility. And Mr. Graham would say it like this. Humility. Because he's from the South. And he had that resonant voice. All right. When you would get together with Billy Graham, if you were given that opportunity, you would soon find that what had been marketed about him was not who you were with. In other words, the first time I got to really spend any time with him, I'd just been asked to take over leadership of the Billy Graham Center at Wheaton College. So they fly me to Ottawa, Canada, where he is doing a crusade. And it's Sunday night, and there's 20 or 30,000 people in an arena above us because he was down in the basement of the auditorium. And what Mr. Graham liked to do is just meet with people and talk before he would go out and speak. So there was this green room with even better stuff than Mary provided for us today, which is pretty good. Pretty good stuff. And there was mayors there, and there was senators, and it's just this potpourri of those that would be marched in to say hello to Billy Graham. I was last. And by the time it was my turn to go, I was sitting alone in that green room, shaking in my boots, because Billy Graham had to approve of me before I could take this new position. And so I'm ready to go on. I think, well, mayors have been in there, dignitaries, all of this stuff. There's lots of large men with black suits on and earbuds in their ear. They're security. And so they start walking down this long aisleway after all these people have gone in ahead of me, and they're gone, and now it's my turn. And I'm thinking to myself, I kind of don't like this. This is like stardom. Is this like a president? What's all this about? All of this security, all of this hoopla, all of this fanciness. We finally get to the door of the room where he sits, and what they would do for Mr. Graham is they would always set up like a little living room with him, with a couple of chairs he could sit back in. Dick, did you ever meet him? You're nodding like this, like you may have some history. Okay.
9 years old.
Oh, when you're 9 years old, that's great. All right. There's one more large man outside the door before I get to see Billy Graham, and it's his son Franklin. And Franklin's a big guy too, and if you followed him at all, he's scary. So he's looking at me like this. Finally, they usher me in to a place I wish I didn't want to go, because I just felt that I was in way over my head. And what's all this notoriety stuff anyway? But, B-U-T, but, once I walked into the room, everything changed. There were 2 sitting chairs there. He was in one of them, and the other one was for me. And he stands up at age 80 to walk across and shake my hand. And he takes my hand, he looks down at me because he's 6'2", 6'3", and he just looks in my eyes and he says, "Lon, I've been waiting to meet you." What? We sit down, we start to chat. He's a grandfather in every sense of the word. All he wanted to know was about my family, about my life, How did I come to know Jesus? It was so warm and so tender. He told me a little bit about his. You say, how long were you with him, Lon? I was with him about 10 minutes, maybe 15, because Amy Grant was coming in afterwards, and she was having marital problems, and he said, I wish I had more time with you, but I'm really trying to help her during this hard time in her life. Grandfather, humble, centered, focused not on him, absolutely focused on the person that was before him. That's humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less.
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
Humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. And I felt totally attended to by clearly the most admired man in the world for those few minutes. Then the creme de la creme. Here comes the humility thing, you guys. I should have brought the picture, because it's a picture of me bursting out laughing. So we're having this little discussion, and the man who brought me in, Sterling Houston, his head of North American Ministries, he says, Bill, and if you knew him well, I guess you could call him Bill. And he goes, what? He says, we also wanted you to know that Lon's going to be great for this position because he did his doctoral work in homiletics, and his thesis is in evangelistic preaching. And Billy Graham, age 80 years old, looks over at me and he goes, you did? And I go, yes, sir. And then Billy Graham puts his hand on my shoulder and he says, maybe you could teach me to preach better. That's what he said, brother. I'm not kidding. And I immediately burst out laughing. The reason I know that is they took a picture of it. So Billy Graham's got his hand on my shoulder, he's looking right into my eyes, as serious as could be, and I'm going, I didn't even know how to respond. Here's how I finally responded. I don't think I could help you, sir. Everything that I studied is predicated on your work. He goes, well, I think you could. Most humble human I have ever met in my life. Humility. God destroys the proud. He elevates the humble. And you say, well, what made him so humble? I don't know. I think it's because he was around Jesus so much. And the more you study Jesus, and the more you pray to Jesus, and the more you walk with Jesus, the more you recognize that you are the created one, and God is the creator. And why in the world would we ever want any other position except to be humble? Humble people are those who don't think less of themselves. Humble people are those who think of themselves less because they think of Jesus Christ more. That's all I've got time to say on that. Number 2, fun story. So humility just marks him, and people that know him far better than I ever had the opportunity would say the same thing. It's daunting. It was shocking, his humility when you look at it. Number 2, focus. F-O-C-U-S. Man, did he have focus. What do I mean by that? He knew what God had called him to do, and if you study his life, you'll find lots of people thought God had other things for him to do. In the course of his life, he will be offered the presidency of a brand new university on the Gulf Coast of Florida that would be equivalent to Harvard, fully funded, if he would be willing to become the president of it. It was intended to be a, quote, Christian Harvard-like university. He prayed over it. He knew it wasn't what God called him to do. He said no. He was asked by Lyndon Baines Johnson when President Johnson was stepping down from the presidency. He and Billy were pretty good friends. And he asked Billy if he would consider running for the presidency of the United States. Because he felt that that's the kind of leader that they needed. And Johnson said, I will help get you there. He went home and he talked to Ruth about it. And his precious wife, Ruth, was a very honest and real, wonderful person. And she said, well, gosh, I don't think you could get elected. And he said, why couldn't I get elected? because they won't allow a divorced person to be president. And you won't be married. But beyond that, he simply knew what God had called him to do and what God had called him not to do. Focus. That's been one of the problems in my life. I have 10 minutes left. Thank you. That's been one of the problems in my life. Sometimes people that are given different capacities are never sure which capacities they're to focus on. That's where good mentoring helps out in your life. Having friends that you can really talk to, who help you identify, as our brother said, what'd you call that?
Your unique ability.
Your unique ability. Billy Graham had discovered his unique ability. It was to proclaim Jesus Christ and call the Church of Jesus Christ to proclaim Jesus Christ in the world. The third offer he had, and I'll be brief with this, but I know how fun stories are, is they really wanted him to be a movie star. In November 1949, in the book we call it that When All Heaven Broke Loose. That was the LA crusade in 1949. He'd had little bitty crusades before that. They weren't very successful. But suddenly, from September to November of 1949, all heaven broke loose. He becomes world famous, etc., etc., etc. Right after that, he goes to Boston, where he was just supposed to do a weekend of meetings in the Great Park Street Church, which we've probably been in, guys, Jimmy and Tommy. And but by this time, Billy was much more than a Sunday speaker in a local church. And so when he got to Boston, right over New Year's weekend of 1950, he's 31 years old, okay? 31 years old. And he gets there, and suddenly press is everywhere. It had followed him from California. He was a national thing that was happening now. He knew he was going to be asked by the New England Press to have a press conference. And just before he was to go out to the press conference, one of his dear friends, a man by the name of Alan Emery, and I'm looking at my friend Ken, because how are you related to Alan Emery?
He'd be the father of my brother-in-law.
Yeah, and he was a companion of Billy's at Wheaton College. Good friend, became a magnet in textile wool industry, etc., etc. And he traveled with Billy early on. Okay, so scene set, Boston. All heaven's breaking loose. Billy doesn't know how to control it. No one knows how to control it. And now he's got to talk to the press all the time as a 31-year-old kid from the South. All right. Just before he was to go out, a telegram had arrived from Los Angeles. This comes directly from Alan. I got this. He told me this. And the telegram was from a leading studio, and it was offering him $2 million to star in 2 movies. Okay? Alan brought it to him and said, Mr. Graham, I don't know if you want to read this before you go out, but I just thought I should let you know it comes. So Billy takes the telegram, according to Alan Emery, and he reads it, and he just crumples it into a ball, and he puts it in his suit coat. And he goes out in front of journalists can be vicious.
You're kidding.
And in New England, a white guy from the South, to all of that Southern sort of mystique on it, and prejudice and all of that, and sophisticated Boston, you know.
Right.
It's quite elitist. So they come out and they start asking questions, and they throw the Elmer Gantry thing at him. Remember Sinclair Lewis? 1920s, Pulitzer Prize winning author, writes that book about Elmer Gantry, the corrupt evangelist. Wine, women, and song. And so one of these journalists asked the question, aren't you just into this like every other one of you religious people are into this for what you get out of it? And Alan Emery said, Billy Graham just was kind of quiet. And then he reaches into his pocket and he pulls out the crumpled, to be thrown away telegram. And he hands it to that journalist, Nan, just like it was you, right there in front of him. And according to Alan Emery, the man opened it up and he read it. And Billy looked at him. He said, I guess if I was after what you think I'm after, I wouldn't have done that with that telegram. The man read it. He passed it down the line to the rest of the journalists. Focus. He knew what he was called to, and he knew what God wanted him to do. And neither fame, nor massive university, nor any presidency of the United States would draw him away. That's a unique gift in leadership, especially to those that are multi-gifted, to discern what God really wants us to give our attention to. So that's number 2. Number 1, humility. Number 2, focus. Number 3, team. T-E-A-M-T. You've never met a person, yes you have. You know humble people. And when you try to applaud them, they'll say, oh, well, it was really because of, I watched Tommy do this with Mary this morning, right? Good job, buddy. Deflecting and pointing to someone else who's done it well. Billy Graham, from the very beginning, called people around him of extraordinary capacity. They were drawn to him. He never wanted the organization to be named the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association. For years, he wanted to be the Billy Graham and Cliff Barrows Evangelistic Association. He wanted his name off it. He didn't want it there. He always had the sense that only if you draw people around you of like spirit and commitment can great things be done. And so he built a team. This team, as Jerry Buss, the former owner of the Lakers, says, if you want a great organization, hire giants, people that are better than you, even in what you do. And I think Mr. Graham just kind of always thought that's what God was providing for him. He was always talking about what others were doing. He started getting honorary doctorates given to him. So you know what he did with the honorary doctorates? He finally stopped taking them. And when a school would call and say, we want to give you an honorary doctorate, he says, I've already got too many. But would you consider giving Sterling Houston one? Would you consider giving Leighton Ford one? Would you consider doing it? It was always about the team and not just about him. I know that sometimes he needed partners that would look him right in the eye and hold him accountable. The role that Martin Luther King played with Billy Graham to help him really address the inherent racism, even in Mr. Graham, was astounding. It's in the book. You'll see the story. So our team isn't only yes men and yes women. Our team are people that are talented, skilled, and hear from God in ways that we don't, and can make what we're called to do better than we could ever imagine. He was always about team. And then that leads to the 4th. Some of these team members would then be used for the wonderful calling of accountability. Number 4, and our final point, accountability. Accountability. Martin Luther King played a great role in his life. The great theologian from New York University, Reinhold Niebuhr, had nothing but bad to say about Billy Graham. Thought he was a simpleton. Billy Graham tried to get together with him. Niebuhr would never meet with him one-on-one, but they had correspondence through Time Magazine and other journalists, and one of the things Billy Graham said is, I need more Niebuhrs in my life. Just yesterday I was facing a situation and I had to talk to a pastoral friend because I was afraid I'd said something heretical when I was preaching in his church. And I said, Matthew, let me know. Was there anything I said? Because I had a man kind of coming after me about this. And I said, brother, God ordains the wounds of friends into our lives. You need to have people that look you right in the eye and say, I love you, but you're wrong. And if you're humble, you can handle it. See? If you're humble, you know that you need it. No one likes it. But what a gift are the wounds of a friend who helps us to see the blind spots that we don't see in our own lives. Well, much more to say. I don't know why in the world God raised up Mr. Graham when he did, how he did, and everybody says, who will follow? And I always say, no one's going to follow. Probably not. We haven't seen a second Martin Luther King. We haven't seen a second Augustine or Martin Luther. There are times when God just says, now, and he lays a mantle on somebody. But it doesn't mean that they're not approachable. And it doesn't mean that we don't learn from what the Holy Spirit did in them. Billy Graham, as leader of a movement, humility, focus, team, and accountability. May God bless you. Woo!
Thank you very much, Lon. And we are going to take a break for, actually, Mary, let's do about 7 minutes.